my name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be showing you how I'm painting this pink spring watercolor painting, and yeah, just doing a little tutorial on how I've painted this. So yeah, spring is probably my favorite season to capture when it comes to my art. I love doing flowers and different like botanical and yeah, just different floral pieces for spring. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to show you kind of the materials that I'm using really quick. I just got some new watercolor paintbrushes. It's this Princeton Velvet Touch, and this is my first time using them, and I really like them. I think they held the water really well. I think they worked on the watercolor paper and worked well with my paints. So very happy about these. And then paper that I'm using is this Arches cold pressed paper. And I actually decided to cut the sheet in half. And I mean, you don't have to do that, but I prefer working on a smaller canvas. So I tend to cut my watercolor pages into a smaller size because that's just what works for me. And then the paints that I'm using, I have no idea how to pronounce that. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm so sorry. But I got the set of 24, and yeah, it just has a wide variety of colors. Ignore how messy it is. I desperately need to clean it, but these are the paints that I've been using for quite a while now, probably over a year, if not longer. So I really like these. I think they're very vibrant, they mix really well together, and they also work really well on this paper. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started with painting. Okay, so typically when I start a new painting, I don't really have a very structured way of starting it or anything. I just kind of reference my photo and just kind of start somewhere on the page. So for this one, I started with this leaf at the top left side of the page, and I just kind of briefly do an outline of the shape of the leaf. And I'm being as delicate as possible because these are kind of, you know, small pieces that I'm working with, and then I kind of outline the different veins. For some leaves, the veins are darker, and then other leaf pictures, the veins are lighter, so it really depends on like the photo that you're referencing. So anyway, for this one, the veins were a darker color, and so I decided to just do a brief outline, let that dry for a little bit, and then once that initial layer was fully dry, then I went over it with another layer of a lighter green and kind of filled in the space, and then I let that dry, went over it again and kind of added in the different shading and different like contrasting pieces to make it look a little bit more realistic. So that's kind of the method that I used for all of the different leaves on this page. So it took a little bit of time just like letting the watercolor paints like dry and then going over them again with more layers. So I know there's different techniques to do this, but I really wanted to get in those fine details. So if I hadn't waited for them to dry, then it would just kind of create this big bloom and all of the colors would just kind of blend together. So I didn't really want that to happen. So that's why I did it in this way. And obviously I've sped this up a little bit so you don't have to wait and wait for me to let the paint dry or anything like that. So, but I did just want to explain that. So yeah, and then I mixed up a couple different colors of green. I did kind of a cool toned darker green, and then I did a warmer color that I actually ended up adding some yellow to, so that there was kind of a different contrast between the warm and cool tones, as well as like darker and lighter colors. So, and I did use pretty light layers, and like once the layers dry, it usually dries lighter. So later on I'll actually go back and kind of touch up some of those spots just a little bit. Nothing crazy. I can be a little perfectionistic sometimes, and I try to not do that. So I just go back in and touch it up a little bit if I feel like it's needing a little bit more contrast. So yeah, and then for like the branches, I kind of did something similar where I went over them and kind of mixed this like light green with like yellows and did the branch, and then added in that little outline to give it a little bit of shading and shadow. and I did that with like a brown. And then for the flower, this one, I I also used a lot of like very light layers, and so waited for those to dry and then went in and added some detail and kind of built it up that way. So tried a very light, very watery initial layer where I just kind of fill in most of the petals and let that fully dry so that it wasn't going to blend in the details that I wanted to add in later. Yeah, so really wanted these petals to look like very dainty and as realistic as possible. So I mixed a pink color that had a little bit more pigment, a little less water to it, and then added in some of those contrasting details, kind of where some of the shadows are. And really when I'm working on something like this, I look at the picture and I just identify different shapes and different lines and those contrasting points, and I just try to build it up and fill it in there. And I typically try to work on like smaller sections at a time, so like one petal and different spots on it. And then sometimes I just kind of, you know, make it up as I go in that like I don't need to copy every single little piece from the photo that I'm referencing, but just kind of get the general like main contrast, the main highlights, and work on it that way. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, a lot of just layering with this. So, and again, like because the watercolor paints dry a little bit lighter, when I'm first working on it, I feel like, wow, this is really dark and it's a little harsh. But as it like settles and absorbs into the page, it actually ends up being a little bit lighter. So that's why it takes kind of a little bit more time to like let it build and let it develop that contrast over some time. So, but yeah, I'm using these new watercolor paint brushes that I just got. And I'm using this little round brush, and I really like it. I feel like it's been good for adding some of these details, and yeah, this one has been working out really well. So I'm enjoying painting with this one. So yeah, and as you can see, I'm just like slowly building up the details here, and then also, again, waiting for it to fully dry, which I've cut out, so it just kind of looks like I'm going over it again, but I'm definitely taking the time to like let it dry. So, and then adding in the little leaves again, kind of behind the flower. And yeah, I think overall, I know the painting itself probably took me, I don't know, probably a little over an hour total. And I typically like to break it up into different chunks of time, so I don't necessarily sit down and work on it for a full hour. Sometimes I do, but usually I'll break it up into like 10-minute segments, 20-minute segments, or 30-minute segments, and kind of work on my pieces that way, just so that, I mean, sometimes it does take time for, obviously, like the watercolor to dry. Sometimes my camera battery dies and needs to be recharged, or sometimes I just need a little bit of a break. My hands will get a little tired, so, but yeah, overall, the whole filming of this, I think, took about an hour total, so not too bad. But yeah, and then for the stem that I'm doing, I guess you can see it a little bit better than the other one that I painted, but I just mixed up like this kind of warm green, and I just did a basic outline of the whole stem, and then I blended a couple different colors together to make a brown and added that over it. And then once that dried, I went in again and added a few more layers to make it a little bit darker, and then added in some of the shadows and shading and stuff too. So honestly, this whole process is so like therapeutic for me, and I really like filling in the colors and blending them together and just painting. Like, I just had so much fun working on this. I think I listened to a couple different like podcasts, and so it was just like really nice and relaxing. And then working on the stamen in the middle, I mixed a few different shades of like a warm yellow, and I just kind of went in and made it a little speckle, just did these little lines, and then went over it again once that dried and added some more contrasting ones, added in a little bit of like an orangey yellow in between it, and just kind of filled it in that way and made it a little bit more contrasted. So here is the final painting. I hope you enjoyed it, and I do have a few more of these I'm going to be painting, just different painting tutorials of different types of flowers and different branches and stuff like this. So I will see you in the next video.